In an isolated mansion in a beautiful field, a young boy reflects on what it means to see, because from what people say, he isn't able to do that. When his family notices his question, they feel sorry for the poor boy who never had that privilege. Then a man answers that seeing is being able to perceive colors and shapes. However, the boy's eye is the scar left by the holy knight Histoa, which is a great privilege that the boy should be proud of. Hearing this, the young boy overhears two maids talking to each other about how pitiful he is, even though he has heroic scars, and he can't understand why he's viewed that way just because he can't see. Later, one of the maids leads Kunan by the hand down the hallway and announces that teacher Jenny has arrived. To be honest, the kid thinks studying magic is a pain, but the woman tells him to take advantage of the opportunity, especially because he has the water crest. The problem is that Kunan, even though he has this thing, simply can't get anywhere without needing someone's help. Then he is taken to the magic tutor, who introduces herself as Jenny Kors. A little later, in one of the lessons, Jenny praises the boy a lot for having managed to summon a small water orb. She explains that he used the spell Aori, and that he has an easier time using water element powers. The teacher explains that the student managed to summon a water orb the size of an eye. And when he hears that, the boy places his hand over his own left eye. This makes Jenny realize she probably shouldn't have made that exact comparison, so she apologizes. However, Kunan wasn't offended by what she said. On the contrary, when he learned he created something the size of an eye, he wondered if maybe he could create an eye with magic. During snack time, Kunan becomes very curious to know what it is he has always eaten in his afternoon sandwich. So he feels the ingredients with his hand, like eggs and salad. And this curiosity seems to awaken a new spark in him. Maybe one day he could see for the first time. For now, since he still can't see, all he can do is smell the food. But one thing he questions the maid about is why there are so many different smells on the table. She answers that the master eats everything, and that it's a pleasure to prepare all those foods. Then she brings a grape to his mouth. Being treated like a baby makes the boy threaten to cut her salary for that. After the meal, when Professor Fleur asks which subject he wants to study today, Kunan says he wants history. Speaking of which, he would like to tell the story of the holy knight Histoa Huglia. Fleur becomes worried and looks at his maid for approval. And since the maid signals okay, the teacher decides to let him go ahead as long as he says something if he feels unwell. Certain he won't have any problem with that. Kunan explains that, long ago, there was a great war between heroes from all over the world and the demon lord. The hero of this country, Histoa Huglia, defeated that enemy. But the battle was so fierce that he lost an arm and a leg. After the war, Histoa's descendants were sometimes children born missing something, an arm, or even their vision. These children were considered the return of a hero, although Kunan doesn't like being labeled that way, because he feels it reduces the complexity of who he is to a mere title. After all, he is Kunan Gurian, and because he has the water crest, he is capable of surprising people with his magic. However, the most difficult challenge the boy desires is something far more complicated than that. And even though he is being praised for how easily he has been forming water orbs recently, what Kunan truly wanted during this training in the courtyard was to be able to develop his own eyes through sorcery. But the truth is, the kid is so focused on this plan that he ends up overdoing his training quite a bit. And it's no surprise that suddenly he lets the water orbs burst and collapses on the ground. After being taken inside, still groggy, Kunan keeps repeating that it wasn't enough. The maid asks whether he's talking about her love for him, but if he thinks it isn't enough, then maybe the only thing that could solve this situation is if the two of them slept together. Without patience for this nonsense, Kunan grumbles that he doesn't have the knowledge or the physical strength required to create truly powerful magic. About that, the maid reminds him that he's only 7 years old and doesn't even eat properly. But he is convinced he's behind, especially because he fainted just from using basic magic. For that reason, the boy decides he needs to build muscle. But the problem is that he can't do exercises like running because of his blindness. Since that's the case, his maid advises him to train by striking with a sword. So she runs to the master to get a qualified teacher. Before she leaves, Kunan thanks Aiko for all the help she has given him. Taking advantage of the compliment, Aiko shamelessly asks for a raise. Some time later, while practicing the art of the sword with his new instructor, Master Auro, Kunan hears Jenny arriving to begin the boy's next lesson. She asks if the student has started training fencing as well, and he explains that to use magic, it's important to have knowledge and physical strength. Jenny notices how much the boy has changed lately, so she offers him a break before starting the lesson. However, Kunan refuses the break and wants to begin right away. So, Jenny decides to start today's class by reviewing the Aori spell from last time, picking up from where the apprentice left off. But when he hears this, Kunan conjures a large quantity of water orbs, all perfectly formed even though his tutor had only just begun teaching him this spell, which means he reached that level on his own. As the hours went by, a maid from another estate entered the room of a girl named Mirika and told her that her carriage was ready. Mirika asked if she really needed to go, and the servant made it clear that it was the king's decision that the young lady meet her fiancé. Soon after, even though she was annoyed, the girl stepped into the carriage and began her trip. Along the way, Mirika reflected on how precious Kunan Gurion was to the kingdom of Huglia because he bore the hero's scar, and she knew it was her responsibility to carry on with the political marriage arranged with him. But that didn't mean she felt comfortable with it. On a day when the two had been together, Mirika had carried Kunan through the forest and asked what he wanted to do. At that time, however, the boy's self-esteem was worth almost nothing. He said he couldn't do anything or go anywhere because of his condition. Mirika assumed she would have to look at that depressed face for the rest of her life, but to her surprise, Kunan was very different from the last time. For whatever reason, when she met her fiancé again, he carried himself with a bright, confident demeanor. Mirika asked what had changed, and the boy explained that he had grown to really like magic. To show what he meant, he used Ori magic and conjured a water sphere that left Mirika fascinated, though not as much as when he burst the sphere and made a beautiful rainbow appear above her head, which drew a spontaneous smile from her. On top of that, Kunan apologized for always making her uncomfortable with what he called his ugly grumpy face, then reached out his hand to tell her all the amazing things that had been happening to him. By late afternoon, Mirika began her return trip in a completely different state from when she had left for her fiancé's home. Now she was excited, satisfied, and embarrassed by how good her day had been. As for Kunan, he realized it had been the first time he had ever reached out his hand to someone like that, and Aiko cut in to say that he did it because he was a gentleman. With that in mind, the boy went looking for another teacher this time, a professional who could refine his behavior so he could truly become a gentleman worthy of his lady. That night, in a library, Professor Jenny was beside herself. The image of Kunan conjuring 7 water spheres at once, with that level of perfection, was too much for her. She couldn't stand the fact that even she couldn't do something like that. Thinking she needed to move his lessons to the intermediate level and stop feeling useless, she got carried away and ended up speaking loudly inside the library, earning a scolding for it. Even more frustrated, she thought about how her plan had been to have an easy job with a good paycheck by teaching a child basic magic. But Kunan was certainly making her work much harder than she expected, especially considering the boy was only 7, and she felt it was too early for him to move on to intermediate spellcraft. In any case, the truth was that Jenny needed to prepare lessons that matched what her student was showing, which was crucial if she wanted to keep the job. The next day, the teacher returned to her apprentice's home and announced that they would analyze the nature of Aori magic. Kunan asked whether, when producing water and making it float, something was responsible for keeping it spherical. Jenny explained that temperature, viscosity, structure, and other elements contributed to that, and reminded him that there were many different types of water, even if most people didn't know that. To give an example, she conjured 2 water spheres and asked him to touch them. Kunan felt that the one in his right hand was cold, while the one in his left was warm. Jenny added that adding a certain type of arrangement is what makes a spell original, and originality is extremely important for any mage. With that in mind, the boy summoned a water sphere, let it collapse, and filled a cup on the table. He asked Aiko to drink it, and she tasted a wonderful apple flavor. It was actually plum, as Kunan clarified. But what mattered was that he had managed such a feat just from hearing a bit of theory, which impressed Jenny even more. Despite all his talent, Kunan spent the night in bed lamenting how he could understand the scent and shape of things, but still couldn't see their colors. Knowing he wouldn't be able to create eyes without understanding color, Kunan promised to give everything he had so that one day he could see the world. He held 2 fruits of different colors and focused all his attention on them. The next morning, he sat at the table for breakfast, and Aiko asked what he wanted to drink. The boy asked for tea with milk, but without the milk. Aiko requested some hot water, and Kunan provided it with Aori. Watching the sphere of water travel through the air, she commented on how incredible and mysterious magic was. To her, someone who couldn't use magic, it felt like a miracle from God. In the middle of all that, Kunan suddenly jolted upright from his chair. Aiko asked what was wrong, and he said he had managed to see for a second. She was so stunned she threatened to slap him if he was lying. He begged her to calm down, saying he didn't really understand what had happened either. Thinking it over, he concluded that maybe he hadn't actually seen, but had, in some way, managed to perceive the colors of certain things through magic. To prove it, he picked up a fruit and stated firmly that it was red, though Aiko corrected him. Then he grabbed another fruit, and this time he got the color right. Seeing that, Aiko realized that, in Kunan's mind, colors and their names probably didn't line up yet. And although she didn't want to confuse him, she pointed out that, by the way, the green apple he was holding was actually light green. Kunan admits he wishes things were simpler. But he doesn't get discouraged. Aiko asks how many apples of each color are in the basket, and he gets it exactly right, 3 red and 2 green. From that point on, the maid sees this new ability of the boy as a true miracle. Obviously, a few days after running tests, she tells her master that Kunan is able to distinguish the colors of fruits and, from the looks of it, even though his range is very limited, he can still see from very close up. The man asks whether the child can read books, and the maid says yes, he can identify the color of the ink by tracing the outline with his finger. Or rather, the truth is that he still needs to learn to read the letters, but he's fascinated by books and illustrated guides. Given the news, looking downcast, the master recommends that Aiko and Kunan return to the main house, because the boy has been living separately since he doesn't want the others to feel bad for him, especially the master's wife, who would end up taking care of him the entire time. Even so, Aiko refuses, because, according to her, Kunan is about to go through an incredible transformation, and changing his environment too much might get in the way of such a necessary change. Since that's the case, the master laments that he's leaving Aiko practically taking care of the boy alone. But she assures him everything is fine. After all, she's doing it for the money. The master says that the employee's humor and joy must be good for his son, so Aiko takes advantage of the moment to ask for a raise instead of more compliments. After that, Aiko goes down to the courtyard where Kunan is waiting for teacher Jenny. He's excited to show his newest discovery, the conjuring of a giant red ball which, according to the maid, has the same color as a white rabbit's eyes. Speaking of which, the boy realizes he senses the color better the larger the object beside him is, so he finally discovers what red is. In the middle of this, next to Kunan's father and a boy, a woman arrives saying she heard that Kunan can now see colors. Kunan hears that voice as if it were the beautiful song of a bird, and immediately recognizes that it's his beloved mother. Distracted, he lets the red ball explode, spilling all the liquid over himself and Aiko. Feeling strong disgust at the scene, the boy's mother faints, so Aiko explains that red is also the color of human blood, and that it's not always pleasant to see your child completely covered in it. Angry at the mess, the boy's father is merciless and puts him on punishment without allowance for 2 months. But worse yet, he cuts part of the poor maid's salary for 3 months, which also makes her faint. Jenny arrives at that moment and, realizing what is happening in the middle of all this confusion, becomes even more convinced that this boy seems to have no limit to his development, given how easily he learns things. By the way, if things continue at this pace, the teacher believes that maybe her student will be able to reach the highest title in the world, Blue Mage. One day, the master of the house calls the older brother to tell him he's thinking about sending Kunan to a school for nobles. He knows it may be difficult for the boy, since the youngest almost never leaves the mansion and adapting to the outside world won't be easy. But that's exactly why the father needs the help of the older brother. When he hears this, the son remembers a day when he tried to take Kunan out of the house to play a little. But even though he wanted to show the boy he could trust him, he ended up letting him trip on the stairs and fall. Either way, he promises his father that he will do his best to protect his blind brother. Meanwhile, Kunan is reading about a water divination technique, where he must fill a magically treated container with water that helps locate lost objects and predict the future. Aiko asks if it can find the youthful glow she has lost somewhere, but Kunan assures her that not only is she at the height of her youth, she also has such beauty that no man would dare leave her alone. In fact, if he weren't the Marquis's son, Kunan would certainly want Aiko as his wife. Aiko jokes that she is 10 years older than he is, and while the two of them laugh, Professor Fleur asks whether this joke isn't going a bit too far, since she's not there to play around. Fleur soon sits with the student to begin the day's lesson, and Kunan shows great intelligence and an ease in understanding things. After some time teaching him, Fleur was able to teach the boy to behave like a true aristocratic knight. She remembers that one day, Aiko asked her to turn the boy into a gentleman with a sense of humor. But although she knows this is important for anyone, she must be careful so Kunan doesn't act frivolously, considering the position he holds. In any case, it's true that he is more pleasant than he has ever been. When he receives a drink, Kunan smells the aroma and imagines it is a 12-year aged production from the New Kingdom. But Aiko corrects him, saying it's actually from Huglia, a national brew. When night falls, Kunan and Aiko face the forest cold alone as they head home. Uncomfortable with the low temperature, the maid asks the boy to do something about it. So he conjures 2 warm balls of water that she presses against her face and immediately falls in love with how they feel. Kunan explains that he wrapped the water in an extremely soft and elastic membrane precisely so it would be pleasant, changing the subject, considering that his father wants to talk to him. The boy asks whether he's going to be scolded, but Aiko doesn't think he's done anything that deserves a reprimand, assuming he learned his lesson after that incident with a red ball. Kunan says he only did that because Aiko gave him the idea to make something flashy, and she admits she went a little overboard. When they arrive home, the pair is greeted by Baron, the butler, as well as by his brother, who has just come down from the second floor. While guiding them through the hall, the boy asks whether Kunan really doesn't need to be led by the hand anymore, and Kunan assures him he can already perceive most of what surrounds him. Seeing how much he has matured, the brother praises how far Kunan has come. Next, the two brothers are taken to their father and mother. According to the father, Kunan has completed studies equivalent to an aristocratic school, so he asks whether he wouldn't like to attend school anyway. Kunan rejects the idea, imagining that people around him would be bothered by him, and saying he would rather prioritize other things right now. The father insists that he wants his son to be free to live however he wishes, but reminds him that all noble children are required to attend school. Therefore, Kunan is, in theory, a student of an aristocratic school. Still, due to the circumstances, the king said the boy did not need to attend, so Kunan has a special exemption. Even so, the Marquis hopes the boy thinks carefully about what he plans to do from now on. But since he doesn't quite understand what his father is referring to, the child starts explaining himself, unnecessarily saying that if his father is talking about his allowance, he has always been very responsible with his expenses and always thinks about the good of others. Well, unless you count the day he exploded a giant red ball in the yard and made it look like the lawn had been the site of an animal sacrifice. Nervous just remembering that episode, the father agrees that it was indeed unforgivable, but says that isn't what he wants Kunan to think about. In fact, he was talking about Princess Mirika. According to the Marquis, those who don't fulfill their duties as nobles end up at a disadvantage in society. In other words, because of Kunan, Mirika's future position may worsen. Since that's the case, Kunan decides he'll go, even though he thinks it's a pain. The father says the boy doesn't have to attend for years if he doesn't want to, and instead asks him to take the promotion exam. If he passes the test, he can obtain an official graduation diploma, and since there are 5 exams, he only needs to go to the school those 5 times. Kunan's brother explains that he and Mirika will graduate in the next exam, and that they'll end up taking it together. The mother adds that, if that's the case, it would be good to start preparing for Kunan to go to school and, first of all, he needs to get measured for new clothes, shoes, and fashionable coats. She calls Aiko to help with this, and when the 3 leave the room, the Marquis tells Ixio that there are other members of the royal family studying at the school, and that they may cross paths with Kunan and Princess Mirika. But Ixio assures him everything will be fine since he'll be there with them. Indeed, Kunan ends up meeting Mirika, who now sees her fiancé in a different light. Blushing bright red, she asks if he's really going to school, and he confirms that yes, though only during the 5 days of the promotion exam. Besides, he admits he doesn't really understand what school is, but Mirika promises she'll stay by his side every day to show him how things work there. Even though he's grateful, the boy says he's worried, since if he goes accompanied by Princess Mirika, the betas who like her highness will definitely get tiny with jealousy. Embarrassed, the girl insists that won't be a problem, so Kunan asks whether she isn't popular enough for that. Mirika is offended by the question. After all, she is a princess, and there are so many boys who like her that she can count them on all the fingers of her right hand. Realizing he'll have to deal with 5 jealous betas, Kunan thinks about buying a wand for self-defense. Not only that, but when Kunan gets his new clothes and shows up for the carriage that will take him to school, Aiko practically goes crazy over how beautiful the outfit looks. When he steps inside, the boy conjures water and places it around each wheel in a way that gives such incredible stability that, as Ixio quickly notices, the carriage doesn't shake at all, proof of how useful his brother's magic is. Kunan remarks that, at this rate, who knows, maybe he can even get a job someday. Since they're on that topic, Ixio asks whether his brother isn't anxious about going far from home, but he says he's calm. After all, he's become stronger recently. He knows he caused a lot of worry to everyone in the family in the past, but now things are different. Back on that day when he left home with his brother and fell down the stairs, Kunan imagines Ixio still blames himself, but he promises he's fine. Kunan admits that in the past he only wanted to disappear, but now he's determined to live, no matter what. Ixio is impressed by his brother's spirit, until the kid adds that he'll stay alive even if every other human in this world dies. That bizarre statement definitely made the mood strange. So Kunan explains he meant he'll live so long that the rest of humanity will fade before him. breaking into a cold sweat at how weird that sounds. Ixio pretends everything is normal while starting to think the boy is acting like this because of that crazy maid. Meanwhile, Kunon realizes they're getting close to the school, which surprises his brother. According to the blind boy, he can feel the presence of many people. Once there, Kunon taps the ground with his wand to check whether it's safe, until Princess Mirika comes running to see her future husband. Charming as always, Kunon says what a privilege it is to hear his beloved's beautiful voice early in the morning, and that he'll make sure to say how happy he is until this excursion ends. Mirika, in turn, compliments the boy's tie, and the two joke quite embarrassingly that Kunon should pull it off and rip it if, by any chance, he ended up looking more handsome than the girl on this outing. Embarrassed by how strange these two are, Ixio starts walking into the school alongside Mirika. But for some reason, Kunon remains behind. He was focusing his sharpened senses on the surroundings, and because of that, he could hear people talking far away, as well as sense the presence of countless people everywhere. If he were his old self, the boy knows he would definitely hesitate. But now he's someone else and is willing to move forward. So he extends his hand to his damsel and asks to play the role of the young lady for now. And Mirika pretends to be a gentleman, taking his hand to guide him. Farther ahead, a teacher named Cast couldn't take her eyes off the clock as she anxiously waited for someone to arrive. After all, she'd heard rumors that the Marquis's second son, who bears hero-like scars, is a very shy boy. If that's true, and considering she's a new teacher, Cast is worried she won't be able to guide him properly. Speaking of him, Kunon appears and melts the hearts of the girls he passes with all his charm and style, even though he's wearing a black, frightening mask covering his eyes. Seeing him approach, Cast calls out Konon Gurian's name and introduces herself as his guide for the afternoon. Ridiculously, Konon says he's a woman and deserves courtesy. The teacher is visibly confused, so he says he is biologically male. His personality is male, but right now he is a woman, a beautiful woman. Cast just looks at this lunatic with an expression that shows she understood absolutely nothing. But the conversation is interrupted by the ringing of the bell, sending everyone on their separate ways. Ixio leaves his brother in the teacher's care, and she somehow feels this job is going to be a bit complicated. Meanwhile, watching the scene from inside the classroom, a group of students comments among themselves about the appearance of the first descendant of Huglia born with the hero's mark in the last 100 years, having received the king's blessings. A blonde boy frowns when he hears that, so his classmates try everything to downplay what they just said about Kunon. But it doesn't work. Prince Lyle isn't in the mood to hear excuses. He simply leaves and orders the other boys to follow. Later, after placing Kunon in a classroom, Cast asks whether he knows what the promotion exam is, and he says that if he passes the exam, he earns the right to graduate. The teacher adds that normally, after taking a test, there's a preparation period before the next one. But in Kunon's case, he'll take them all consecutively, since she received a request from his father and from the king, showing his strange personality again. Kunon claims the Marquis and the king are conspiring against him, which the teacher pretends not to hear. Anyway, she sets the test on his desk and tells him he can say anything if there's something he doesn't understand. So the boy insists on the conspiracy between his father and the king, but the teacher makes it clear he should talk about the test questions, not political plots. Later on, while correcting Kunon's test, Cast couldn't wrap his head around how the boy had gotten every single question right, considering he spent the entire exam talking nonsense. Free from the first test, Kunon goes with his beloved to the cafeteria to get something to eat. But he's stopped by Prince Lyle and his suck-ups. The first thing Lyle does is say Princess Mirika's name with contempt, while people start gathering around the mess that's about to blow up. Ixio arrives just then and sees the situation heating up. While Lyle grumbles that a kid like Kunon received his father's blessing, Mirika tells her brother to stop talking nonsense. Ixio steps in front of his brother to try to calm things down, but it's obvious Lyle is dying to pick a fight, and the suck-ups keep stirring things up and agreeing with everything the prince says. Kunon, meanwhile, comes up with a more creative way out of this trap. He pulls a small amount of water from the cafeteria nearby and throws it onto the prince's pants, making it look like he wet himself out of fear. Kunon himself points out the guy's wet pants, of course, and although Lyle tries to convince everyone that it's not what they're thinking, not even his own lackeys seem to buy it. Humiliated, Lyle retreats and leaves the Gurians alone. The first thing Ixio does is ask if his brother was the one who did that, but Kunon ignores him, acts crazy, and keeps repeating non-stop that he's dying to devour a hamburger. Already seated at the cafeteria table, Kunon asks who that guy was, and Mirika says he's her brother, 1 year older than she is. Lyle Huglia, the sixth prince, seeing that the girl's brother seems more interested in bothering her than helping her. Kunon says he's grateful to have Ixio as a brother instead of that psycho. But Ixio can only think about how completely different his brother is and has no idea how to report that to his father. Meanwhile, Prince Lyle's anger shows that he's not going to let this slide. Going back to the moment when Lyle Huglia was humiliated in public after magically urinating in his pants, as he walked through the halls of the institution with a sour expression. He even managed to frighten the other students. As if that weren't enough, even Cass, the teacher who asked him to make less noise in the hallway, got a blunt, "Don't bother me," showing that the title of prince gave the boy the freedom to speak that way to someone who should be above him. When Kunan had lunch in the cafeteria with his fiancée and his brother, he asked why Lyle didn't even try to hide his violent behavior and had presented himself to them in such a hostile way. Mirka thinks they might have tried to keep her in line somehow, since her brother is the 6th prince and she is the 9th princess, which puts her in a lower position within the royal hierarchy. On the other hand, Kunan is a mage with a hero's scar, and he is her fiancé, which raised the girl's standing. In addition, when Kunan showed himself in public, whether he wanted to or not, he ended up exposing himself to jealous people like Lyle. In any case, Mirka believes that one day she and her future husband may reach an even higher position in high society. But she, regardless of her father or social position, is above all happy to be Kunan's fiancé. The boy agreed and added that when he meets the king, he feels he'll even kneel out of sheer gratitude. Even so, for now he thinks he needs to apologize to Prince Lyle, but his fiancée and her brother shut that down immediately. The next day, Kunan showed up in the morning for practice before the final exam, which would take place in the afternoon. When he conjured a ball of water without any trouble, Jenny announced that they would change its texture in today's arrangement. When the boy turned the water ball into ice, she placed her hand on it and said it felt like an apple, and that he needed to touch various things and reproduce what he felt. Later, in front of a carriage, while Kunan was petting a horse's fur, Ixio asked what he was doing, and when his brother answered that he was gathering examples for his arrangements, the older one didn't understand anything. When the princess came running toward them, Kunan bowed politely to welcome his fiancée and pointed out that the fact it would be the last time he would hear the maiden's beautiful voice at school made the world sink into the twilight of sadness. Mirka said that classes ended at the end of the afternoon, so the boy corrected himself, saying that in that case, he wasn't that sad. When the three went to the room where the final exam would be held, Kunan got excited because the place finally felt like a real school, but he lamented that it wasn't a special class with Professor Cast. Hearing that, Cast replied that she would be following the students very closely. Ixio commented that the two of them seemed close, and his brother replied that they talked about many things during the exam. Mirka questioned what kind of strange conversation that was, and the boy explained that it was a story focused on Cast's desire to become a teacher after following a man she liked to the high aristocracy school, but the guy failed twice, and she's the only one who has been in this career for 2 years. Ixio and Mirka found it absurd that the teacher talked about that with a child during an exam, but they let it go. At that moment, some students gathered to ask the princess to introduce her fiancé, but encouraged by his teacher, Kunan Gurian himself used all his charm and manners to introduce himself as Mirka Huglia's fiancé and Ixio Gurian's younger brother. By the way, the boy admitted he was happy people had come to talk to them, since he swore the princess and her brother had no friends in that place. Offended, Mirka said that she was the one who asked everyone to leave her alone so she could have more privacy with her fiancé, and Kunan thanked her for the consideration. Still, he insisted he had been worried and was glad to know that his Ixio and Mirka weren't lonely souls at school, because that way he didn't need to say ridiculous things like "friends don't matter" or "it's better to be alone," showing his sharp tongue and honesty. Kunan ended up scaring some of the students, but Mirka already knew him well enough to say he wasn't actually worried. With no shame at all, Kunan admitted she was right and added that most people don't have any trouble being alone, even if they don't realize it. While Kunan shocked the classroom with his strange behavior, Prince Lyle's classmates announced that it was time for the exam, but the kid deliberately stood there with his arms crossed like a spoiled brat just to make the teachers wait. One of the boys argued that the final exam would be done with everyone together, and that even His Highness could suffer some punishment for being late. Finally, when Kunan was feeling the texture of a pigeon to acquire new abilities, the bell rang and signaled the beginning of the evaluation. Then, when Mirka took her fiancé's hand to guide him to his place, Lyle stepped between them and shot a look of pure hatred at the two. In that moment, Ixio remembered Baron talking with the maids about how the prince could be unbearable, but that he was still a prince and had to be respected. At the same time, Lyle looked at the shocked faces of the students and thought about how they stayed quiet with those stupid expressions, even though they always talked badly about him behind his back. Suddenly, Kunan grabbed Lyle's hand and introduced himself politely as Mirka's fiancé. Everyone became tense about what would come next. While Lyle tried to pull his hand away and Kunan insisted that he was the guy's future brother-in-law, Lyle grumbled that he hadn't given permission to be touched. and Kunan felt his hand and said the prince must have such a dignified face that he would stare at him so much he'd end up drilling a hole through it. Hearing that, the prince asked his sister who this lunatic was, while the people around them tried and failed to hold back their laughter. Mirika commented that her brother was even embarrassed by Kunan's behavior. So to prove otherwise, he raised the level of aggression and ordered the boy to let go of his hand. After complimenting the prince's strength, Kunan finally did what he was told. Then the teacher finally announced the beginning of the final exam, and Lyle kept a scowl on his face the entire time. After the tests were corrected, Cast gets ready to announce the students who passed on the board. Just when everyone thinks she's about to write the names, she draws a flower with the chalk instead and, full of joy, reveals that everyone has passed the test. The announcement sets off a wave of celebration across the classroom. The prince's classmates continue sucking up to him, and Ikshio praises his brother, who praises him right back, happy at the thought of graduating alongside her fiancé. Mirika celebrates next to Kunan, after finishing everything he needed to do at the aristocratic school. Kunan says goodbye to his friends there and leaves by carriage to return home, joking that he'll offer his older brother to any girls who might want him when they come back. Watching him depart, Cast reflects that the boy is strange, but besides being a good student, he's remarkably talented. Someone else who smiles at Kunan's departure is Prince Lyle, but for a different and obvious reason. Some time later, when he returns to his training, Kunan is ordered by his teacher to make a whirlpool inside a water sphere and then divide the sphere into 10 pieces, something he accomplishes quickly. Then he has to color 3 spheres and change their texture, earning praise from Jenny. However, the boy points out that he tried creating an arrangement by adding shape, temperature, and texture. With that, he forms a dove out of a water sphere, and the creature flies off as if it were real, leaving Jenny so stunned she actually kneels on the ground. Because of this, she invites the student to have tea with her after training, curious about the reason for the sudden meeting. He wonders whether this is a celebration for his graduation, but in truth, the teacher is preparing the boy for a shocking reality. Immediately, Kunan starts lamenting ahead of time that Jenny is actually the goddess of the night sky who now needs to return to the world of the gods. Jenny likes that version of the story, but unfortunately, it's not the truth she needs to tell. The issue is that she hasn't had anything left to teach him for a long time, and she can no longer help with his development. In fact, Kunan will surpass her level if he learns one more spell. Kunan stands up angrily and says he loved all the times his teacher used weird tricks to hide the fact that she no longer had anything to teach him. Jenny is relieved that the boy already knew she was desperate, but he insists those desperate tricks were what really pushed him to expand the reach of his spells, especially when she told him that the water sphere he always conjured was about the size of an eye. To be honest, Kunan thinks Jenny gave him a purpose in life. Even so, she reinforces that she was mostly just filling space, even though she racked her brains through many late nights trying to invent things to teach the kid. In any case, Kunan wants to keep Jenny and asks if she wants to leave because she's being paid too little. But she says it's actually the opposite. Her salary is high, and she feels humiliated at being nearly surpassed by such a young student. For that reason, Jenny touches Kunan's shoulder and says he needs to find a mage far superior to his current mentor, because if he continues taking lessons from her, he certainly won't evolve as much as he needs to or as much as he's capable of. Refusing to accept Jenny's advice, Kunan keeps insisting he prefers being fooled by her wonderful tricks if it means staying with her, raising his voice and repeating over and over that it's better to be fooled than to let go of his mentor. Then, while the boy pours out all that emotion, water-shaped animals approach the pair without them noticing, until they surround the two and leave Jenny amazed. Once again, recognizing that she has reached her limit, the woman demonstrates in practice just how much her student's magic has already surpassed her own. As she leaves the boy's mansion, Jenny concludes that he is definitely a prodigy and that one day he will be a blue mage. After all, despite having so much innate talent, he continues to put effort into improving every single day, which is the real secret to his current success. In turn, confident that she too can grow, the teacher promises she won't let her student overtake her so easily. The next day, Kunan learns from Aiko that Professor Fleur also resigned after he finished the classroom material and already graduated. She didn't say goodbye in person because she knew she would cry, so Kunan decides to send her a letter. Since he's doing that, Aiko asks him to also check whether Fleur is now working at the mansion of some handsome, wealthy young man between 18 and 25 so she can marry him. Kunan asks if the maid is really going to leave him just like that, and she admits it's sad. But getting married is her biggest life dream. Besides, she's certain the boy can already do everything on his own. Still, Kunan feels sad thinking that 2 of his teachers have already left, and now he might even lose his personal maid. He says there's a superstition that rabbits die if they're left alone, and trembling at the thought of sharing the same fate, he refuses to send Fleur a letter asking about handsome young men. That night, when the family gathers for dinner, Kunon tells everyone about Jenny's advice to look for a talented mage to be his mentor. Ixio comments that at school, there's a rumor about an incredible court mage, some guy named Zio something. The boy's mother asks whether they're talking about Zionli Finroll, and Ixio confirms it's him, the handsome mage. Their father, on the other hand, asks everyone to be quiet and says it's impossible to ask something like that of a court mage. Kunon questions how that's possible if their family is supposedly extremely close to the king, and the father gets irritated, asking whether it was Aiko who told him that. While the maid starts to panic, the man explains that a court magician is also the title of a position in the royal palace. With the exception of the king and those under the king's command, no one else can give them orders. In short, people like that barely ever leave the castle. Also because their contact with anyone outside the royal family is limited, making it very difficult for the Gurian family to even reach a magician of that level. Since that's the case, Kunon comes up with a brilliant plan on the spot. He will go with his father for a visit to the castle, pretend he got lost inside, and wait to be rescued by the court magicians, thus becoming their apprentice. The father asks how his son can say something so dumb with such conviction, but the boy insists the plan has a 90% chance of working. When the father corrects him, saying it's no more than 10%, the boy asks, looking all pitiful, if his mother agrees, and she practically answers that the kid is a genius. Actually, using that same face, she asks her husband to do something about the situation, so the man agrees to at least speak with the king. In the next scene, inside the castle, the royal director receives the Gurian family's request and highlights how strange it is for a young beginner mage to ask a court magician to be his mentor, even if he is the son of a noble close to the king. The woman who delivered the boy's documents says that her sister Mirika is crazy about him, until the director suddenly gets up from his chair and firmly repeats the young mage's full name, Kunon Gurian. Check out these videos appearing on your screen and subscribe so you don't miss the next part.